Daniel Afonso will be talking about the ownership of the services. And I really like his question, like you have different types of owners for the different processes around the services, and what's the life cycle of the service itself. He is a developer advocate from PagerDuty, so I'm really happy to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well, that you're feeling energized after this coffee. Some of you are still transitioning from the coffee. Just please be mindful as you do so as well, and try to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. So we had a minor setback with the computer, so I'm doing this presentation on a computer where I didn't practice. So let's hope that everything goes well. It's also my first time using this clicker. So I would like to start this presentation with having you imagine a situation. I want you to imagine a world where you understand why you are working on something. Doing so allows you to understand what that thing dependencies are and what exactly it is that you're supposed to be delivering. I want you to imagine a world that the impact of the work that you deliver is so clear to you that you know exactly what's going to be delivering to your customers, to your business, and what can you continue to do to keep innovating. Well, by doing this, you and your teams could even possibly work together more quickly, sorry, translation service is failing, more quickly and collaboratively to deliver business value and even experiment. That's crazy, trying to experiment new stuff. Well, this world exists, and we call it full service ownership. So this is the presentation that I'll be delivering. Let's work, okay? So introducing myself real quickly, my name is Daniel Afonso. I'm a developer advocate at PagerDuty. I came from Portugal, live in a city based called Coimbra. So if anyone here knows about Portugal, okay, a couple people know about Portugal. Interesting. So for context, I live 2 hours away from Lisbon, 1 hour away from Porto. That's the easiest way to explain it for people who have heard about it. You can find me online pretty much anywhere at Daniel JC Afonso. I'm a huge comic book nerd, and I like to collect, as you can see a bit through the back of my photo there. We can discuss that in different times. So let's talk about full service ownership, shall we? Because what is exactly full service ownership? Well, we could go through this quote, or we can go through a shorter definition. The way I like to say it is, you build it, you ship it, you own it. There's no handoffs between development and operation, and this empowers developers and your teams to resolve incidents faster. So it breaks down the silos between teams that previously were dependent on, promotes accountability, and encourages the continuous improvement. Because thinking about it, the faster that you identify issues, the faster you can fix them. So this model, at the end of the day, will benefit every business. And the truth is that every business nowadays is a digital business. So in reality, every service that we build is a digital service. And as users, we expect them to work flawlessly and to keep being innovative. We want new things coming out always. And full service ownership allows you to do this. You see, patience has a limit. And nowadays, our patience and attention spans just keep getting lower and lower and lower. We don't have the patience that we used to have a couple years ago. So not everyone will wait for your service to recover when an incident shows up. They might likely move to a competitor application or not even come back. They might too. They might come back because, well, depending on whatever the service that you're giving them, it might be value. But you should be aware that when you have incidents and have stuff that it's not responsive, the trust that the customers have on your services and in your business will decrease. So just to give you an example, a loss at a major retailer a couple years ago, it was a 2-hour outage, cost them around $50 million. And this is terrifying, right? The truth is, services will fail. That's a fact of operating. You cannot expect for that 100% availability at all times. What you can control is how your company responds when this happens. And that's what makes the difference between customers staying with you or moving to a competitor. Now, what we want to do, we want to reduce the number of handoffs. So traditionally, development was outsourced to IT. Then we started moving to a model where dev was insourced, but operations were outsourced. We want to move to a model, the full service ownership one, where everything is built in-house and everything is sourced in-house. Because this reduces the number of handoffs, empowers the engineers and your teams to own the entire thing in production. And besides that, it significantly mitigates the risk of customers leaving by reducing resolution time. Why? Well, because now the subject matter experts, the people who actually know the thing, are the first responders. When an incident shows up, they are the ones who are called first. And this is great because having someone with direct knowledge of the thing that they're building will decrease chaos and will decrease the panic that you will have when an incident shows up and you're trying to track down who the heck is supposed to fix it. So faster incident resolution times are not the only benefit of full service ownership, but it's one of the fastest way to demonstrate any return of investment in these initiatives. And speaking of return on investment, the MTTA and MTTR are a great places to start looking. So MTTA, or mean time to acknowledge, is the measures the average time from when an incident first shows up until the time it's acknowledged by a user or a subject matter expert. The MTTR, or mean time to resolution, measures the time between when the incident shows up until it's resolved. So once the incident shows up, the clock starts ticking on both of these metrics. So full service ownership improves these metrics by removing the chaos of tracking down the experts and on moments that are very, very stressful. And with this, it means that stuff will get fixed faster and, well, the chances of your customers leaving are not that high. So I would like to dive a bit into this thing that we call a service, because it's actually a very broad thing. And how broad it is? Well, for today, let's call all of these things a service, shall we? The rule of thumb is if it provides value for people, it's a service. So the definition we like to use at PagerDuty is a service is a discrete piece of functionality that provides value and that is wholly owned by a team. This is specific because it can refer to infrastructure components, infrastructure composed of distinct services, but it also applies to parts of our monolithic code base. And it even extends to some external tools. With this universality in mind, we find that this is a definition that's particularly helpful regardless of what architectural stack and your architectural model is. Now, let's talk a bit on what you need to define a service, shall we? Because the first step is to come to a shared understanding. And it's a shared understanding of the boundaries of your service. You want to know where it starts and where it ends. And you want to know who the key stakeholders are. Who are the people that actually can help your service move? So if, for instance, there are multiple teams contributing, maintaining, and supporting this service, then this becomes even more important. So how do we reach this shared understanding, you might be thinking? Well, there's a couple of steps. Let's start with the first one. Who is responsible for the service? Who's working on it? Who do you expect to build, ship, and own? Who is this team? And then, because the reason here is that a service should be owned by the team that will own its own core responsibilities. And that's right, the first rule of thumb. I'm going to say the rule of thumb a couple of times here, but that should be the first one. If you're going to have the responsibility of being waken up at the middle of the night for some reason, you should be aware of what that service does. So that's the first rule. If for some reason you have multiple teams that should share this responsibility, then you should start thinking, is this a single service or can this be split into multiple ones? Speaking of on-call rotations, people on your team should share the responsibility of owning this service in production and maintain its reliability. So create on-call schedules that will rotate individuals and backup responders individually. It is also important that you set up policies for escalation contacts in the case of the person cannot be available at that moment because life happens. Even if you're on call, you're not going to be available at all times for rather circumstances. So you need to make sure that there's someone that can back you up when you're not there, or if you're not there. But let's hope that you're there the majority of times. The next step is to ensure that our teams are correctly sized. So in the early days of Amazon, Jeff Bezos set the rule that teams shouldn't be larger than 2 pizzas can feed, no matter how large the company gets. If this is true, I would be a one-person team in certain scenarios, but that's a different discussion. But the motivation behind this, it's actually because when you have smaller teams, you don't have to be continuously giving status updates. It's faster to communicate. And this allows the team and gives you more time to actually experiment and try out new stuff and get the stuff done that you have. So it also allows you, and I already talked about continuous improvement, yes. The next part here is regarding service definitions. So your services should be set up granularly enough so that the members of your team can quickly help identify the source of problems. When an incident shows up, you want to figure out immediately what's happening and try to avoid time trying to diagnose root cause analysis. If for some reason you have 2 microservices behaving as one, and usually fixing an issue on one means fixing the issue on another one, then it might make sense as well to combine them. So I already gave you an example on when it might make sense to separate them. Now it's an example on when it might make sense to combine them. Now, a question that often happens and we get and I have gotten from customers and people trying to adopt full service ownership is the monolith. Because we all have monoliths. I have monoliths. Who here has monoliths? Okay, there's a couple of us here at monoliths. And the rule here again is, how are you going to address the on-call responsibilities for this monolith? Think about it. Because, well, monoliths tend to be the cause of a lot of incidents. That has been my personal experience. And usually the team that owns it by itself, if there's a team that owns it by itself, won't own anything else. They won't own any on-call responsibilities for anything unless the load on those monoliths is quite low. Now, there's some steps that we can try to take to make this better and make full service ownership better for teams trying to deal with monoliths, which is gradually identifying functionalities of your monolith and then routing the alerts for those functionalities to specific teams. And what you're trying to do here basically is splitting your monolith into different functionalities and creating services in itself. And eventually you can even say, okay, this part of the monolith can be moved outside of it, and that's a completely other discussion. But each source of functionality is going to be helpful for you for documentation, it's going to be helpful for runbooks, and it's going to be helpful for on-call ownership. Regarding dependencies, the rule of thumb here is don't worry about them in the beginning. In the beginning, you want to figure out how to define your service, how do you get the different functionalities working together, because we're going to talk about functions in a bit. Once you have all of that part narrowed down, then we talk about dependencies. So now let's talk about the functions that are often part of service ownership, shall we? Because in its essence, it's a shared responsibility. It goes from engineering to leadership, and everyone should be committed to making sure that this happens, because if one of these roles fails, then it's going to get trickier for you to actually have a full cultural adoption of full service ownership, because different companies are structured differently. What works for me might not work for you, what works for you might not work for me. So therefore, the approach that we're going to follow in the next slides and the functions that we're going to talk in a bit will be focused on the functions rather than the roles. It's about that you have a standardization of what these things mean rather than who will do them. So the first function that's important is documentation. There are more concerns than writing code. How many of you often try to look at the service, try to look at the library package, something, just to get some indication and found out that the README was empty, sparse, or was missing stuff? Yeah, that happens very often. The documentation should help out there. It should help us explain what the code does, in addition to a contract that other services can understand, and even if they have to interact with the service. And nowadays, if we're talking about AI as well, that specific file that you can help LLMs understand what the heck the service is can also be included there. This is just me adding an AI stuff because I have zero AI in this presentation, so now there's some AI. your documentation should also make sense to anyone who will interact with it. This applies to the code, but it applies to the documentation. Make sure that everything that you do and everything that you add is reviewed. You don't want to be a single source of failure. You don't want the documentation to be stuck in your mind, because you never know what happens. You might leave the company, you might have an accident, and then that knowledge disappears. And then people spend months and years trying to figuring out what the heck the code means on the line 200 from the service, whatever. So avoid single points of failure and have everything there. And for the people who are saying, oh, the code is enough documentation, it isn't. I've had many people telling me that. Now, I love this one. Naming. Naming is hard. Is it? Because in service ownership, we just say something. Name it for what it does. It should be as straightforward as that. I know we are very tempted to use pop culture reference, Greek gods, ancient gods' names. Like, I've worked at different companies and at different teams. I've seen the service name Atlas at least 3 or 4 times. But what does actually the Apollo service do? We don't know. You should name the service for what it does, because references get lost in time. And how many of you noticed that I changed the name from Atlas to Apollo? 1 person. 2 people noticed that. That's exactly what's going to happen in your organization. If you name a service with that name today, in 2-3 years or a couple of minutes, nobody's going to know what it does. So instead, name it for what it does. Out service, shopping cart, messaging service. These are all stuff that are more descriptive than actually any of these references. The other part here is descriptions. So every service should have a description that will clearly communicate what it does and why it exists to anyone that will interact with it. At a minimum, you should try to answer these 4 questions. First one is, what is the intent of the service? Second one, how does it deliver any value? The third point here is, what does it contribute to? And finally, if it's customer-facing, what is the impact to customers and to the business? You should also try to avoid listing external components here, or service that you interact with, because what happens very often is you include them in the initial documentation, they change, they don't notify you, and then your docs are outdated. So if you decide to try to have some dependencies there, at least make sure that you have a way of, when they change, you actually hear about it, and you can update your docs as well. Some other considerations that finally also happen regarding documentation. It's dependencies, APIs, and mechanisms, deployment mechanisms. Because not often you will have to document these things, but if you have to do any of them, so when we're talking about dependencies, it might be interesting to track single points of failure, possible circular dependencies, and critical components that might be likely to fail. And when we're talking about stuff like APIs, so you should list the functionalities that you guarantee that the consumers of these APIs are going to have. But when you do that, please avoid turning this into a best practices. You're going to have other places to do that. Here is just listing what it's supposed to do so that anyone who's going to be interacting with this public API knows it. Regarding deployment mechanisms, some teams have their own ways of deploying stuff. So you should explain at least how can you see the status of your deployments so that people can troubleshoot stuff if issues happen to occur. Another rule of thumb, explain yourself or a coworker what your service does. If you put yourself into a starting perspective, what would I need to know if I wanted to start using that service? And you use that as a starting point for your documentation and for everything to define with your service. Now, enough of documentation. Let's talk quickly about availability, because I've said this before, no service can or will be available 100% of the time. It's a fallacy that we keep trying to believe that ourselves. So it is important that first we have realistic expectations on how the heck this thing is going to be handled. But we set this with a set of metrics. So the most common ones that you've probably heard about are service level indicators, SLIs, service level objectives, SLOs, and service level agreements, SLAs. So these are the most commonly used. An alternative way to set organization-wide expectations is by using service tiers. So some organizations have a strictly binary way of defining services, so they are either critical or non-critical. Others use a tier level, from tier 1 to tier 3. You can even have more, so it's your organization, you define stuff however you want. At PagerDuty, we use tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 internally as well. So the tier 1 services are the ones that have the strictest expectations of latency, uptime, and so forth. These are the services that also have the heaviest responsibilities on the organization, so they require 24/7 on-call. The people that own them are always on-call. Obviously, we rotate. It's not the same person. It has to have multiple levels of robustness, a disaster recovery plan in case something goes wrong, and up-to-date runbooks. We'll talk about runbooks in a bit. When we're talking about tier 2 and tier 3 services, these are the ones that might provide additional functionalities, but are not in the critical path. So they don't require 24/7 on-call. Usually Monday, Friday during business hours is more than enough. These can be new services that are not generally available yet, that you are trying out for some customers, but are still not in the critical path. Regarding runbooks, so quick TLDR. They are a how-to guide for how you can complete commonly repeated tasks or procedures when dealing with your service. So when things go wrong, they are there to help. And they are there to help, and they make sure that you reduce the time that you would take trying to fix stuff or trying to figure out issues. Common issues might be documented there. So the first and only thing I want to say about runbooks is keep them updated and document common fixes. When you do postmortems, try to identify stuff that might go there. We'll talk about this. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about this in a bit. But one thing that is also important to say is not everything needs to be a runbook. One thing that people often forget when doing postmortems is, oh, I'm going to add this into my runbook, when they should be considering, can we actually add this into the service itself? Can we actually, if this is a common thing, let's see if we can add this into our backlog. And this is something that people often tend to forget, but that's also a discussion for another day. Regarding production operations, you own a service, you operate it in production. That's the first thing here. So your service team should set up monitoring, alerts, and anything that will ensure that you have the necessary reliability and robustness that you expect. How you do this? It depends. Some organizations might have SRE giving support to service teams. Others have SREs embedded into these teams. So it's going to be an organizational point as well here. You just need to make sure that you have all the telemetry working, your observability, that you know when your services are not behaving properly. Now let's get a bit into the roles that are often more specific to and extend outside of the software development. Let's talk about project management, because there are always going to be unforeseen circumstances. There will be learnings that you get from postmortems, maintenance that needs to happen, and project managers help full service ownership teams be more manageable in a way. That's what I wanted to say. So they help that by defining what done means, shielding the team from stress, and executive swoop. So we often call it executive swoop and poop, because it's when an executive comes in, they think they're helping, but they're actually messing up everything. Project managers are really great at trying to prevent that, at least the ones I've been working with so far. And they also help understanding and mitigating dependencies by doing connective work between the service team and other ones that might need to collaborate together. Another part of full service ownership functions is the product ownership. You see, product owners are responsible for translating the requirements of the customer, which can be things like uptime, performance, and security. But the thing is, customers will often tell their POs what they want their product to do, but they will rarely ask for these three things. But think about it. Without uptime, you cannot access the feature that you have just delivered. Without performance, they will get frustrated and leave. And without security, there's no trust. So at the end of the day, customers are always asking for uptime, performance, and security. They just don't always use those words in interviews. So product owners must work with developers to actually ensure that these things happen. And finally, champions. So full service ownership works better when it's championed by senior leadership. And this is one of the roles that might make it or break it. Because these are going to be the function and the people that will actually make room in your roadmap for improving and investing in tech debt. They are the one that should encourage the culture of cooperation and communicating and sharing. And they should enable everyone to do their job by giving them tools that they need. So they should also help balance business priorities against, well, achievable engineering goals. So if you have a leader that's asking you for 100% availability, that's not properly achievable. So these people need to be realistic and be aware of what actually the work and what they ask from the team. Now, the life cycle of a service. Let's imagine that. No, let's imagine nothing. Let's start by review exactly what are the steps that are involved in a life cycle of a service, because there are three ones. There are three. It's the design phase, it's the runtime phase, and the sunsetting one. And these are the three steps that every service will go through. So we start by the designing phase. So while existing, or how we call them, brownfield projects might be a great place to start, and they are, sometimes we want a fresh start. And this is where greenfield projects come in. They allow you to have a fresh start and shape things however you want. And it's also a great place to practice full service ownership because you're starting from the beginning. Here are just three things that you should have in mind when you're in your design phase. So the first one is the customer needs. One thing that people tend to forget is anyone that consumes your service is a customer. There's not just external customers in your companies. If they own it, if they use it, they are your customers. So it's important that you are aligned with their needs all the way through the design process. The next part here is making sure that you have a pre-production environment, and something that is as close to your prod as possible so that you can practice and you can check if everything works before it actually gets shipped to your customers. And finally, make sure you're production ready. What does it mean to be production ready? Well, first one, are the communication processes established between the teams that are going to be involved with anything that might impact this service going to production? That's the first one. Are we prepared for failure? So do we have our alerts and notifications set up? Have we tested them out? Are our observability tools giving us the right telemetry so that we can figure out if something is wrong? Third step, draft an initial runbook. A minimal runbook is better than no runbook at all. I think that's something important to mention here as well. And finally, make sure that all the stakeholders, so this can be security teams, can be project managers, have given you the thumbs up before you actually send stuff to production. Ideally, this should happen during the process, so this is all about the shift left culture and everything. Make sure that this stuff happens throughout the development process rather than at the end. The hardening sprint, as some teams like to call it, it's an anti-pattern. Now we have shipped our service and is in production, is living there, and we are done. No, we're not. There's stuff that we're going to have to keep working. There's going to be improvements. There's going to be features. There's going to be bug fixes. There's going to be a lot of stuff. So some things to take in consideration. First one that people forget, versioning. If you have an API, version it. It will really, really help you when you're doing breaking changes and shipping new features. If it's a library or a package, just follow semantic versioning practices. Second point, customer communication. Make sure that your customers are always up to date to what's happening with your service. You can do this through mailing lists or through change logs that exist in a predictable place where they can figure out. Especially with breaking changes. They need to know what's changing in your service. And finally, reliability maintenance. So incidents happen, you do postmortems. You do postmortems, you have action items. And from these action items, there's going to be plenty of outcomes. You're either going to add stuff to your backlog to improve your service and build that up, build that reliability, or you're going to identify some stuff that might make sense to add into your runbooks. Now, everything that's good sometimes comes to an end, and we might decide that we want to sunset our service. But sunsetting is more than just turning it off. We can talk, typically we start with deprecation. So this is where we tell our customers, hey, this service is going to be shut down by this date. So there's not going to be new functionalities throughout this time. We'll fix bugs, we'll fix security issues, but by this time, the service will be turned offline. But before you do this, it's important that you actually identify who are the customers that are using your service so that you can measure what would be the business impact of actively turning this service off. So, and finally, and I think this is something that often we fail at doing, is provide a way of offboarding your customers. So give them an alternative, give them possibly a new service that you're working on, give them a migration path, and give them time. I think that's very important. They are, the same time you need to deliver something and to build new services, they're going to have to worry about, okay, how the heck now we're going to migrate out of this service to something. We need time to adjust. If there's a migration path, if there's time, then that's the ideal part. Now, with the next 5 minutes that we have to wrap this up, let's just go over some best practices when adopting full service ownership. Full service ownership includes communication, compromise, commitment. If that sounds like a relationship, it's because it is. If you have customers that are relying on you and are depending on you to delivering them value, you are in a relationship with them. Congratulations. The more personal this model is and might sound that it might take a lot of effort and work, the same thing happens with relationship. The alternative of this is a world of handoffs, a world of confusion, a world of distrust, and a world of frustration. At PagerDuty, it took us years, and it took us a bunch of time to actively understand how to do it for ourselves. This doesn't just happen overnight. But I hope that some of the stuff that I showed in this presentation, even though some of them are very starting points, it will start some discussions with you and your teams. So stuff that happened, that helps. Agility. Agile methodologies and workflows can help the teams stay the course towards this long-term goal by identifying things that are going well, but also predicting potential obstacles that you might have. Next part, start small. So executives want you to show the value of full service ownership. So how about you start with a non-critical production service that exists and start doing the service definition. Start with there, then you start measuring the baseline performance of it, and while you're doing that, you allow your teams to learn the foundations of full service ownership. An immediate win that you should see, it's faster incident resolution. So the MTTA, the MTTR that I mentioned at the beginning, they're going to be way better than they were before. When discussing about greenfield or brownfield, so we talked about an ideal world where we start from the fresh. And greenfield projects give you that fresh start, indeed. But sometimes for your organizations, that's not going to work. You're not going to have time to start from the beginning and do everything from scratch. So maybe it's better to pick some services that you already have and start there to provide this organizational value. Just measure what you think that will be valuable from your organization and then keep scaling up from there. Blameless culture, because you see, mistakes will happen. And when adopting a new culture especially, there's going to be a lot of mistakes. For teams to feel empowered to make decisions and to experiment, sorry, my translation service is failing. And to experiment, they shouldn't fear consequences. They shouldn't fear finger pointing. We don't want that. We want to live in a world where we shouldn't be afraid of doing our work and trying to experiment and growing. It's been proven, a culture of psychological safety is one of the leading indicators for a high-performing teams. And the last best practice is practice makes perfect. So if you want to get better at something, you need to practice. So doing so in low-risk settings helps build confidence for when the real thing comes to knock. A great way of helping test how your full service ownership is going is to try out what we call game days at PagerDuty. We call them game days, aka failure Fridays. Even though at this point they're more failure ending days, as they might happen any specific day. There was just one yesterday. That was not a Friday. So what we do during failure Fridays is we inject some vulnerabilities in our service and we run our incident response process. And we do this in production. And this actually helps the team have the confidence and get the practice of how they deal with the incident, how long does it take them to recover, how do they identify stuff, what are we missing in our runbooks. They practice the entirety of their process. And it's so good that I'm very, very surprised. I've joined PagerDuty 7 months ago, and when incidents happen, it's insane seeing like how these people all come together and just solve an incident like that. It's one of those things that I wish like I could record and just share with everyone because how well oiled up it is because of failure Fridays. So some tips for scaling this, and I'm out of time, and there's 3 slides. So a great onboarding can do wonders. And an effective way of onboarding into service ownership is to shadow teams that have been successful doing that. That's a great way to do it. So have a team lead shadow someone from a team who has done this, who is working pretty well with it, and learn from that. And in return, someone from that team will come back to your team and help you define your service. They will give you hints, they'll give you some tricks, they'll mentor you throughout the process. Speaking of shadowing itself, shadow on-call rotations are created by adding an additional and optional responder to an on-call rotation. By adding a member of someone who's learning full service ownership as an additional responder to a team that's already doing it, it will allow them to see how they handle incidents. It will allow to see what are the practices that they take. And it allow you to build confidence. The main goal here is when it's their turn to do it, they already know what happens. And the person that was initially shadowed will be there just listening and supporting just in case there's any doubt. And the final point here, practice empathy. Because patience and understanding are key when we are learning new things. We tend to forget how hard it is for us to learn stuff. We remember where we started, we remember where we ended, but we forget about it. We forgot all those nights we woke up at 3 a.m. because we had misconfigured alerts and someone was not kind to us. So the message that I would like to have for everyone here is be kind, and be kind always to everyone. So for the last 2 slides, in a nutshell, full service ownership puts you in full control of your code lifecycle. It does require a cultural shift, and it's something that won't be built in a day and won't happen in a day. But in the end, your teams will be more empowered, resilient, and closer to your customers than ever. So if you want to learn a bit more about these things, we have some operational guides that we wrote about full service ownership, incident response. We can talk about this after. And if you want to connect with me, I'm Daniel JC Afonso everywhere. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hello, hello. Okay. Thank you too. It was a great speech. And I think that we all needed to hear that because you didn't focus too much on technology, but on solution, on the service, ownership, and processes and culture around that. That's very important because the tools will not solve the problem. The approach to service ownership will do that.
Thank you so much.
We have still space for questions. So if somebody is curious here, you are curious today like a lot,
I'm always curious, thank you. I mean, if there is anyone who wants to ask.
Maybe we should get extra microphone for this guy because he's asking all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
Quickly. I worked in 3 companies in the last few years.
Okay, last 3 years.
We tried to implement the service model. We explain everything. And the moment we mentioned PagerDuty, all the teams is like, can I say fuck? Yes. Fuck no. Okay. So we tried to understand why. It was, the on-call schedule, right? Mm-hmm. No one wants to do that for like several reasons.
Yes.
Like money-wise, work-life, shitty things, and and some others. So how will you solve that? I mean, it is in your presentation that you skip through it quickly, but how do you solve that?
So that's a great question, because I've struggled with that myself in the past. I've worked in organizations like that. When someone told me, oh, you have to be on call, I'd be like, oh, heck no, I like to have my life. And that's a cultural thing. One of the things that I've learned about on-call culture a bit more, and especially at PagerDuty, is it's a spread out thing. And with resilience, and like as you keep improving your services, obviously in the beginning you're going to mess up and you're going to be woken up. But with time, it's going to get better. So this doesn't answer your question. What I wanted to actively share is, you start with one team. Someone that might be your champion, someone that might be more, okay, we are willing to do on call. Start with them. Make sure you have practices, because depending on the country where you're working from, you are either paid to do on call or not paid to do on call. And you start with these teams, you start piloting, they start building the full service ownership model, and eventually, yeah, there's going to be times they're going to be waking up at 3 a.m. But that's a good thing. It's better that they are waking up at 3 a.m. that they come back in the morning and service has been failing since 2 or 3 or whatever, and your customers are frustrated. So they need to, the mindset that needs to be embedded into teams is, we're doing this for our customers, and we want that, and we're doing this for the services that we are actively building and trying to have people trust. So this can even spark a different other talk that I have, but this is a bit of the gist. I don't know if this fully answered your question or if it gave at least some starting points, but I'll gladly talk a bit more about this, because this talk had at least 50 more minutes if I wanted, where I would go into that part, but unfortunately we are time limited. But thank you for your question. I think there was one here. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to expand on that question. I was wondering, you spoke that the 2 pizza teams for the full service ownership. Dogo mentioned that not everyone wants to be part of an on-call, so you might be like with 2 or 3 people in the team wanting to do on-call. That's not enough, or is it? In my experience, we have 10 to 12 people in an on-call rotation, and that's fair that you don't get fatigue and alert fatigue and stuff like that.
So it depends on the granularity of your service. So imagine, like, if you have 3 people maintaining a monolith that's huge, then probably 3 people are not enough. But if you have a smaller service, you have a smaller system, then 3 people might work out. So it's all about trying to find the granularity of the service that you are trying to build on call for. And you're not always going to have, like, the same people on call for an entire month. You're going to rotate them, like either weekly or every 2 days. For instance, at PagerDuty, our incident commanders, who are the people who are responsible for handling the process when major incident shows up, they rotate every two days, because this is a role that has a lot of responsibility. So it's about first figuring out the granularity of the service that you're trying to do the on-call for, and figuring out, okay, we might need more people, or we might need more people, we might not. So the answer is, it depends. I hate giving this answer, but hopefully this gave some tips on how to start.
So that means that you have the incident commanders are a separate rotation than the subject matter experts.
So that's a different point. So when we're talking about the incident commander system, so you have the incident commander, where people responding to the incidents, we have the customer liaisons, the scribes, and then we have the subject matter experts, who are usually the first responders and the people who will actually get hands-on. So usually the incident commanders show up when there's major incidents, because they are not needed when there's smaller incidents. In smaller incidents, usually a subject matter expert is enough. So it will be about the granularity, and I'm being rushed. I would love to talk with you a bit after this. Thank you, and thank you everyone for your time and for your questions.
No. Thank you.